Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of CryptoMondays Zurich. We're really excited and also a little bit overwhelmed with how many people that decided to join us today. Great to see so many new faces, but also some faces from the previous events. And also, despite this beautiful weather, 30 degrees for you checking from the live stream over there, all of these decided to come here instead of spending the day at the lake, enjoying a few beers. I think that also goes to show the mentality and also the passion of the people in the blockchain space. So thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is William, and I'm one of the organizers of CryptoMondays Zurich. With me here today, I have Elvedin, Luis, and Alia. We are all part of the organizing team. So yes, big applause to my fellow members. And you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you also from my side for coming. My name is Elvedin, also one of the co-hosts, co-organizers, co-founders. And I'm very thrilled to see some people here today that I met in Davos a few weeks ago. And that was just wonderful to see some faces from the first event, some people from Davos. That the community is thriving, people are meeting across the globe. And also joining us here today. We feel very honored that this whole community is still so active despite the crypto winter currently. And that's very nice. It's also our mission and our vision to bring people in real life together and where they have a place to share. Yeah, CryptoMondays started 2018, just before the last all-time high peak craziness. It was founded by Mike Hearn in New York City. Since then, it grew to 80 cities, more than 80 cities. It's hard to follow sometimes. Over 20,000 people attended all the meetups that we had globally. And I'm just going to close this one. That's the downside of being in a city center. And so far it grew. It grew to more than 20,000 people who attended CryptoMondays in total. We have chapters and locations like New York, obviously, Miami, the big blockchain hubs, San Francisco, Houston, but also very successful in London and in Paris. Milan started recently again. We have one in Lisbon. Tel Aviv is quite big. And since 2022, also here in Zurich. So we're very thrilled to be part of that global community.
And if you're wondering why we're using this microphone that doesn't give us any extra sound, I hope you can hear me well at the back. Is it fine? Totally fine. Perfect. We have some guests watching live stream as well from different parts of the world. Welcome to you as well over there at home or at office or whatever, wherever you are. And before we get started, we want to do a shout out to TrustSquare. Thank you so much for hosting and thank you so much for collaboration. They are also sponsoring all of the drinks and all of the food tonight. So thanks a lot. Mark, do you want to say a few words about TrustSquare? What are you guys doing here?
Yeah, well, TrustSquare, for whoever doesn't know, we started that was a couple of years ago, more or less by accident, blockchain hub for startups and corporates and whoever wants to innovate here. So we have a range of different services from events like this. We have 2 locations, one at the product labs, one here, close to 3,000 square meters. And also various services you find online. So I don't not bore you. So I'm very grateful and also proud, basically, to have CryptoMondays here. And we're really happy to support you all here.
Thank you.
I'm on a call, so
see you later. And now to the reason why we are all here. One of the first developers of the Bitcoin blockchain. One of the first transactions with Satoshi himself, worked many years at Google, and is now building on his own ideas. I give it up to Mike Hearn.
thank you very much for coming. I also agree it's a very nice day, and so I hope it's fully worth it for you, and that these ideas will be interesting. Let me just see if I can tackle the enormous complexity of clipping this to my t-shirt. Maybe that'll work. All right. So this talk is a pretty vague title, which is why I'm doubly appreciative of you coming to spend your Monday night here with me. Back to the decentralization drawing board is a talk about how we do things in the software industry, but it's not going to be a very technical talk, so it should be accessible to everybody. And it's based on the experiences that I had over the last 12 years, 11 years or so, of doing at first cryptocurrency and then later more sort of general decentralization projects, and some of the problems that were encountered as part of that. Yes, so I just had a brief intro for those of you who don't know me, because I haven't really been actually involved in the blockchain or Bitcoin community for a long time. Well, I finished up around 2015 there. I currently am the founder of a little company here in Zurich called Hydraulic, and it's not launched yet. If you go to the website, you'll see like a coming soon page, but we hope to launch very soon. And this talk is not really a pitch for that company or what we're doing, but it's going to get mentioned briefly because there is a bit of overlap. Before that, I worked at a company called R3, and that makes a product called Corda. Corda is an enterprise blockchain. So it took the ideas in Bitcoin and applied it to primarily the banking industry, and but also logistics and global trade, because it turned out they, in that space, they have very similar problems to the ones that Satoshi was trying to solve with Bitcoin, and they were very interested in using that same technology. So I spent about 5 years doing that. And I ended up doing that because, as you just heard, I worked on Bitcoin as a developer from the early days. And I did a whole bunch of things when I was working on Bitcoin. In particular, I developed with a guy called Andreas the first mobile wallet, which really helped Bitcoin get into mainstream acceptance, because journalists love taking pictures of it, because they like, look, you can put Bitcoin in your pocket now. It's real money, right? It like goes in the same place as your wallet. And so it made it much less abstract for people. And I also gave the first ever talk on smart contracts, which at the time, no one really knew about. It was a very obscure topic. And in the years since I gave that talk, that was around 2011, I think, people came up to me and said, I saw that talk on YouTube and immediately quit my job and founded a startup. So I don't think I'll ever give a talk as impactful as that one ever again in my entire life, but that's okay. That's probably a good recipe for a quiet life. And then, yes, as you heard, I worked at Google as well, partly while I was doing this Bitcoin stuff. And I worked there. I developed their primary anti-bot platform and their anti-hijacking system. I led the team that did that. And I worked on maps and on Gmail as well. So that's me. I'll get this out of the way at the start, because people always ask. No matter what I want to talk about, people always ask me about this. I don't know who Satoshi is, so don't ask. I think it was one guy. I exchanged many emails with him. Here I am in April 2009. I didn't know how to spell Bitcoin because I was stupid, basically. It did actually have the right spelling on their website, but I ignored it. And I emailed him and I said, I read your paper and I've got a bunch of questions. And we ended up, he sent me some Bitcoins and then I sent them back because there was nothing else to do with them. They were actually worthless. They were not worthless. They were priceless. And then I lost them because, like, what would you do with them? Like, there was clearly never going to turn into anything because Bitcoin didn't even have a website, really. It was like this science project that I just found. And over the preceding years, up until his disappearance, actually, I received I was one of the first people to email him and one of the last, because I was peppering him with questions, mostly about smart contracts until the very end. And then his final email told me, he's moved on to other things and the project is in good hands with everyone. So I don't think he's the NSA or anything like that. I think he's just one guy. And I'll indulge in a bit of speculation about who he might have been a bit later. Anyway, in 2015, I left Bitcoin because of disagreements over block size limits, and also the community was going in a direction I didn't really like very much. So I quit and I decided, what do I do now? And I found that I was an expert in this hot new thing called blockchains. So I joined this little consortium called R3 because they had access to the big businesses and wanted to use this stuff. and said, you know, I don't think Ethereum's going to work actually in the banking community and in industry in general because of various limits. Let's build a new system. And people laughed and they said, you're crazy because IBM are trying to do this too, and they've had business relationships with every one of your possible customers for like 100 years. And the CEO knows all the other CEOs, and so everyone's going to go with IBM, or they're going to go with Ethereum, which is this sort of almost quasi-religious movement, which can also print its own money supply. So you have no chance. And I said, well, probably that's true. But I got to find something to do. So I started writing Corda here in Zurich, actually, in a Starbucks at Still City. And 5 years later, it was the #1 project, as measured by Gartner. I never thought I'd find myself citing Gartner about anything, but here I am. And as you can see, and the reason is they do the research in this space, right? And as you can see, Corda here at the top has more projects in flight in 2020 than the next 3 platforms combined. So we did pretty well there. And I credit that to, some of it was that R3 was founded by finance guys who had a lot of good contacts so they could get the meetings with the customers. But it was also because we actually built it on the ideas in Bitcoin rather than Ethereum. So that was a bit controversial when we added a lot of other ideas too. And we made a lot of moves in designing Corda that were not very fashionable. We didn't get us invited to all the cool parties at the conferences, but it actually was pretty much what they needed. So we got a lot of customers. Okay, so now I'm doing Hydraulic. This talk is not really about it because Hydraulic is not a cryptocurrency startup. It's not a blockchain DLT startup. It's not even really a decentralization. You might be wondering, why am I here then? And the answer is because, well, you know, William and Elvedin sort of just emailed me and said, would you like to give a talk on a topic of your choice? So I said, yes. But don't worry, there is actually, there is some relevance. And this talk is not about our products really, because it's adapted for what you're interested in, right? Which is, I will assume for the purpose of this talk, it's decentralization. Hydraulic is actually a developer tools company. So this is, like I said, a talk about how we do things in the software industry, but you don't need to be a developer to follow the argument. And I'm going to make an argument to you in this talk that we have problems in the software business and we can solve them with better tools. So that's kind of the pitch. With the intro done, welcome. Right, the agenda of the talk today is I am going to ask rhetorically, why are so few apps really decentralized? The word really here is important. A lot of apps claim to be decentralized, but in my view, they aren't really, or they aren't very decentralized in an interesting or meaningful way. So I'm going to ask why that is. And then, because merely asking questions wouldn't make for a very interesting talk, I'm going to outrageously point the finger of blame, and I'm going to point it at web technology and the web as a tool. Web 2, by the way. You will not really be hearing much about Web 3 in this talk. And I'm going to say, obviously, decentralization is hard for lots of reasons. And some of them are social and political. But today I'm going to talk about the technical side. And I'm going to say the web makes this hard. And then, because merely pointing out problems is also maybe not the most constructive thing you can do, I'm going to present a plan for what to do about it. And that's where the company enters the picture, because that's exactly what Hydraulic is doing. It's executing on that plan. All right, so part 1 is, why are so few apps really decentralized? Now, this is already a bit of a stupid question, to be honest, because, of course, decentralization is not a binary yes-no thing, and it never was. It's a spectrum. So I'm going to drop a few pins on this line here, and it's all very subject to debate, right? You can disagree with me on all this stuff, and that's perfectly reasonable. You know, over here, I'm going to say that Bitcoin 1.0 in the early days when I got involved, well, actually, I started using Bitcoin 0.1, but we'll get to that in a second. This is like pretty decentralized. It was a peer-to-peer network, and it was so decentralized, the guy who created it vanished, and the system just kept working fine. Right? It didn't matter. That's pretty good. It's not got 100% because, unfortunately, the development process itself was not decentralized, and it ended up being captured by people with an agenda that, in my view, was not the same as Satoshi's, and there wasn't much the community could do about that, it turned out. And also the community was very reliant on things like Reddit for communication, which was like centralized stuff, but it did pretty good. Over here, 0%, we have mainframes. This is, mainframe is, you know, very old sort of computer, and the screen and the keyboard in the mainframe are just directly wired into the central computer. They're not really like separate devices. Over here, we have web applications, which are a bit better than mainframe applications, but not really very much. The web is a system for documents, actually is pretty good. I didn't put it on this slide, but it could have been, it would have been like over here if it was. It's pretty good. There are lots of websites and they all link to each other, and no one owns the web. But when you start delivering software as a website, it's basically, the server sends drawing commands to your computer and it says like draw a box here and draw some text here. And it's pretty much the same as a mainframe. It's not quite as bad. You can write like extensions and implement dark mode and add blockers and things. So you've got a little bit of control, but it's basically the same model. In the middle, you have Ethereum. Ethereum was, by design, never really meant to run on ordinary people's computers in the same way that Bitcoin was, in my view. But it's not bad. But most people are accessing Ethereum through third-party companies. And in fact, most people who are in Ethereum nodes are now using companies like Infura, so they're not even really running their own nodes. So how decentralized is it really is a very debatable topic. I put it sort of in the middle here, but you could put it in other places too. Modern blockchain doesn't really mean very much, but I put that here. I would throw into this bucket many of the post-Ethereum blockchains, and also Corda, the one I built. I would say it's, it certainly wasn't a purist Bitcoin type vision, right? It was built for big companies, basically, and you needed an IT department to deploy it, basically. So it was not really meant for ordinary people. Although it was designed as a decentralized system, it was not like totally open to all in the same way. And also a lot of these modern systems, because they are designed for coalitions of companies often, they will frequently do things like whitelist people who join. And if you want to join that blockchain network, you have to like sign a contract with a foundation or something like that. And then finally, most controversially, I've put Photoshop over here. Now, Photoshop is obviously, this is like a stand-in for any classical application that you download and run locally. You could put like 3D graphics apps there. You could put music apps. There's lots of Word even. You could put there Excel. Photoshop, this is an interesting one. A lot of people would say, oh, it's clearly not decentralized. It comes from one company. But, Bitcoin and Ethereum come from one dev team too, actually. And if you don't like what they're doing, you're basically out of luck. You can like make your own competitor with the same code, but no one will be using it really. And it splits the community and a lot of other things. Photoshop is interesting because it's basically independent of its creator once you've downloaded and run it and bought it. It's very private, right? Adobe don't see what you're drawing or working on. You can export it to other products very easily. If you've got your data, you can move it to a competitor product and Adobe won't even know. They won't be able to stop you either. With Ethereum and Bitcoin, you can extend them with smart contracts. Photoshop has plugins, so you can actually customize it pretty extensively. And it's a local app, so you can chain things together and your data can be moved around peer-to-peer. And in a way, if you think about it, it is kind of decentralized. There isn't really, although it comes from one company, after you've acquired it, it's basically not really dependent on any one thing, which is quite nice. Modern blockchain, I'm going to briefly pick on Dfinity here, not for any good reason, because actually the system I created, Corda, has the exact same set of problems. But for example, this is what I mean by modern blockchain. If you go to the Dfinity website, they're based here in Zurich, and I've got nothing against them in particular. They just happen to, I happen to be thinking about them because they are local. If you go there and they say things like, well, we have a decentralized Reddit. And I thought, great, that sounds good. I'll try it out. And if you click, you don't get to download anything. You end up at this website here, which is just an ordinary website. It's got this ugly URL, but don't let that fool you. ic0.app is just an ordinary website run by some foundation they set up, and that's how you access it. And if the whatever organization runs ic0.app goes away, you won't be able to access your supposedly decentralized Reddit anymore. And in fact, they can see everything you do there, and they can modify anything you upload or download, and they've basically got complete control and access to this. And in fact, if we look at the top post on this decentralized Reddit at the time, it's something to do with NFTs, which I won't comment on. I'm a bit old for NFTs, I feel. But Entrepot.app, this is also, it's just a company, just a website like any other. It's no different to Facebook or Google or anything else. So this nice vision that the space started with of peer-to-peer networks in which everyone is sort of equal and the creator doesn't matter very much has kind of disappeared over time. This is what Bitcoin 0.1 looked like. This is what I downloaded in 2009. It's an ugly app. This is an ugly Windows app. And in fact, it only ran on Windows, and I had to run it under emulation on Mac OS. Probably one of the reasons I was the first users is actually when I was a teenager, I worked on Windows emulation for other operating systems, and a lot of developers were not using Windows, and so that helped me get a bit of an edge there and get in early. It looks old on the outside and curiously on the inside. The code as written, programmer, for those of you who are not programmers, you've probably heard that there are like different coding styles, and it's almost like handwriting, right? There's like different approaches and yeah, styles of coding. And the Bitcoin code is very interesting. This not only looks like an app written in 1998, but the code itself looked like it was written in 1998. Even though it wasn't, it was released 10 years later. And Satoshi did it this way because this approach of sort of making this downloadable Windows app is really one of the only ways at this time to make a peer-to-peer application. You can't do it, well, at that time, actually, the iPhone was brand new, so you certainly couldn't do it on smartphones. Tablets weren't really a thing, and you couldn't do it as a web app either, so you had to do it this way. But there's a curious thing about this app, which is that if you asked a developer... Actually, can you put your hands up in this room if you are a software developer? And can you keep your hands up if I asked you to write a Win32 app now, would you be able to do it? Okay, we've got a few on the front row here. Yeah, you did Win32. Okay, that's good. I'll be remembering that, Leo, by the way. Okay, so a few. So about half of for those who can't see it at home, I would say about half of the people put up their hands for the first question, then maybe half lowered it for the second. That's my guess. So the sort of, it's been, probably if I asked when was the last time you actually did this, the answer would be like 2 decades ago. Yeah, right, exactly. So there's been this partial loss of knowledge over time, right? Certainly people who got into programming in the last 20 years would not have been able to write this app in the way it was done by Satoshi, but also even those people who can still do it, many have since, been promoted into management or so on. I mean, speaking very generously here, it's been a long time since they've done it, and very often, they're wanting to do things in a different way these ways. So not many people are writing apps like this. So I learned programming at the end of the 80s, and so I also wrote Windows apps in the 90s and so on. And so after I've quit Google, I decided I wanted to do smart contract stuff. So I wrote an app that you see on the screen, which is not a web app. It's a downloadable app, just like Satoshi did. It's got a slightly more modern look and fixes various other things. But it was for crowdfunding. So like Kickstarter, but decentralized. And like Bitcoin 0.1, this connects directly to a peer-to-peer network. And when I went away, it kept on working because, that's kind of how it worked. It was downloadable and didn't rely on any central web servers, really. There was some update checks. One of the interesting things about this app is that though I left Bitcoin before doing this, you could actually recruit a group of people who would vote on whether to release new versions. So even the update process was decentralized, or could have been. Now, when I did this, I went to the States to visit a consulting client, basically. And while I was there, I got an email from Chris Dixon, who's a venture capitalist. And he said, come and talk to me. I want to talk to you. And so I went over to their place. And he said, this is what I imagined there would be lots of when I first got into Bitcoin. This is kind of what I wanted. And I thought there would be lots of apps by now. This was in 2015. But you seem to be the only person who's writing them. So what's up with that? And I said, well, I'm not the only person. There's like 2 others. and us 3, we sort of write apps in this style. But his point was sound. There were not many people writing apps this way. And I said, well, that's a good question, Chris. Why are there not many? Well, it's hard, but it's not clever hard, actually, to do things this way. It's sort of like tedious hard. It's work. But it's not really like fun work that looks good on your CV and makes you more valuable to get a job at Facebook. It's sort of not like fashionable like that. You have to do a lot of things that are just tedious. They're not very clever. But if you want to do this properly in the classical, old school way that Satoshi did things, then you do need to do stuff this way. What he was seeing instead was a lot of people were building web apps and then claiming they were decentralized. And if you wanted to become a first-class member of those networks, then it wasn't like Bitcoin where you just downloaded and ran something and anyone could do it. It was, if you followed the instructions, it would be like, here's how you run a node, step 1 of 20, and then there was this implicit step 0 that said, spend 5 years learning about Linux and containers and become an IT professional, and then you can start following step 1 through 20. And so they said, we'll have a bunch of people who run nodes for you, and everyone else just logs into our website like it's a bank. which is not a very compelling vision. And if Bitcoin had worked that way, I don't think anyone would have cared. Actually, I'm sure they wouldn't have cared, because before there was Bitcoin, there was Ripple. And I don't mean the Ripple that exists today. I mean a totally different project that happened to use the name. And eventually the guy who ran that project sold the name. So now it's very confusing, and Ripple means two different things. But Ripple actually predated Bitcoin. And it was also meant to be a decentralized take on internet money, a very different one. It was based on netting out of debts, but it didn't invent its own currency or anything. But Ripple, although in theory it was decentralized, the way Ryan implemented it, it was basically a website you logged into. And decentralization of the network was like to do, get back to this later. And no one really cared, right? What inspired people about Bitcoin was this notion of like anyone can download it and run it, and now you're a part of this global system, and everyone is equal. So why were so many people abusing web browsers to try and deliver decentralized apps, which is a specific instance of the more general question of why do we use browsers to deliver apps in the first place, which of course is standard Gmail. If you load it on your computer, it's a web app. But this makes not much sense if you think about it, because these tools were designed to draw documents, not applications. So why do we do this? Well, maybe we shouldn't, actually, because the browser is a very inappropriate tool for many tasks. If you go back to the basics and you evaluate this and you say, if you had a blank slate and someone gave you lots of money and said, design your theoretically ideal computing infrastructure, you probably wouldn't start by saying, well, we'll have a thing that downloads documents, and then we'll add loads of random features and try and make it do apps as well. Doesn't make much sense. An app and a document are quite different things at many levels. But we use them anyway because browsers have evolved to solve a lot of very basic problems. And decentralization space, like the IT sector really as a whole, is full of very clever people who want to solve hard problems, but they want to solve clever hard problems. They don't want to solve old problems in new ways that are perhaps better suited for their new use case, right? That's sort of not very interesting because it's not really hard. It's just tedious. It's just a lot of work. And in particular with decentralized apps, you saw that where people said, I don't really want to deal with this tedious work, so I'll just make a web app and claim it's decentralized, and maybe in theory it could be, but in practice we'll end up running all the nodes. Well, I say it is tedious. It was tedious before Hydraulic came along, and this talk will make more sense after the company is launched, but it will be on YouTube for a while, so that's okay. We'll get to that. But also, there's another reason we use browsers, which is the competitors all over the years either dropped the ball and they sort of took their eye off the ball and stopped serving their customers and users correctly, or they were actually explicitly killed by browser makers who didn't want the competition, in my view, right? Like people writing Windows apps in desktop Java and Adobe Flash, and Apple still fights on in the mobile world, but on this nice Mac laptop I have here, it's actually, there are not many apps written specifically for it. People are mostly making web apps today. Browsers do a lot of basic things that are not clever hard, but we need. Most obviously, software update and distribution. You go to a website and you always see the latest version, and they can change it however often they want. Big websites like, Google Maps, for example, might update 50 times a day. They are shipping. No? Oh, okay. I know of other companies that do claim they update 50 times a day, but that's an extreme case for sure. So. Oh, they went slow. They got tired of shipping multiple times a day. Yeah, well, it got big. Well, a lot of companies, they will happily do things like that. They'll release a new version of their software every single day or faster. And you can do that on the web. Users don't even notice because the browser was not designed for apps, therefore has no concept of versions at all. It won't even tell you that something has changed. And, it downloads stuff and keeps it, and then it throws it out after a while if you don't use it, and that's pretty basic. And it downloads files and draws progress bars and renders high-quality typography with lots of different font options, and it connects to your servers reliably, and it abstracts the operating system and the hardware, and it does window management because, Apple's window management with the dock dates from 1991. Right, this came straight out of Next Step, and they never really changed it. They made it look prettier, but the model has not changed for 30 years. And in 1991, there were very few programs out there. Right, the computing industry was tiny, so you didn't really need to manage 100 different apps at once. But nowadays, I see people who have 100 browser tabs open all the time. That's not so weird. And you just can't do that on Mac OS. The dock would break, right? It just doesn't even make sense. So even just basic things like this, right? Browsers solve all these problems. And so people say, I'm going to hammer this square peg into this round hole because I don't want to think about things like rendering high quality text. That's like yesterday's problem. But this leads to all kinds of issues because there's lots of things that browsers don't do well. Anything that is not hub or spoke connectivity, for anything decentralized, you fail immediately, basically, because browsers only understand everyone connects to a server, right? The name of the website is the name of the server. You cannot divorce those two things. So even basic stuff like working offline, which can be as simple as continuing to work while the company has an outage or screwed up something up, right? It doesn't work. They've tried to fix it, I don't know, 1 million times. I don't even remember how many times. Google alone tried to fix this like 5 times. It still doesn't work. Anything peer-to-peer is right out, unless it's video calling, because browsers have a random feature set that boils down to whatever Google wanted to add at the time. Connecting to local devices is an example. The browser was not designed for apps, it was designed for documents, and this creates an enormous flood of security problems. I've seen so many cryptocurrency exchanges get hacked in ways that would not have been possible if they were using tools designed for applications, but they were not. And browsers do a lot of things that make sense if you are distributing scientific documents. If you're Tim Berners-Lee in 1991 saying, how do we exchange information about particle physics with other scientists, it's fine for that. The moment you want to run a blockchain explorer or something, all of the design decisions there become nonsense, and yet we try this. In particular, security is terrible because security is terrible because when you write a web app, for those of you who are not developers, everything you do, the most obvious and simple way is the wrong way. So trying to teach people how to do this in a secure way is a complete nightmare because they will constantly be saying, well, I did this and it's obvious and it works. And you'll have to say, yes, it works, but it's insecure and you're going to get hacked. You have to do things in this roundabout different way. And if you forget at any point, you're screwed. You're out of luck. Someone will just hack you and you won't even know how it happened. And this is unfixable by design. Very hard to extend or customize. You can do it a bit, but Chrome and other browsers are one size fits all. So we'll talk about that in a second. Browsers don't think about apps, so they don't really have any way of integrating apps. This meant when I talked about Photoshop earlier, I said you can save your picture to like a standard format or even to Photoshop's own format and load it into something else, even a competing product, and that works. But browsers don't really have any notion of this. So even basic things like files and plugins and APIs, they're kind of hacks. They're not really a core part of the system. It's just nonsense we've added on top. And we can talk about others as well. But in particular, the real killer for blockchain apps is that you can't do apps developed by mutually distrusting entities. With Lighthouse, I tried to fix this. I said, well, what if you allow 3 groups of developers that are independent, for example, to vote on each update? And if one of them is trying to, insert a backdoor or violate the social contract, or they're trying to make a change that maybe is beneficial to them, but kind of goes back on what they promised their users. Today, it just happens, and if it's a web app, you're just stuck, right? You get a new screen saying agree to our new terms of service, and if you don't agree, you lose all your data. But with decentralized apps, they could say, well, we can't ship this update because the other groups, maybe they're auditing firms, for example, won't sign off on it. Today, you just can't do that. None of the platforms out there have any notion of this. One app always comes from one place, and that's it. You just can't do better. Now, to their credit, the Ethereum guys early on did realize this, and they recognized the web as an inappropriate tool for them, and they created this thing called Mist, which Mist was like a DApp browser. So it was a sort of a browser specifically for decentralized apps. And I have to say, it had beautiful icons, 10 out of 10 for art. I love these. These are really nice. But Mist was killed in 2019. They got rid of it. They canned it. And in fact, they gave a presentation, or they did a blog post and a presentation about why they were getting rid of it, titled What We Did Wrong. And they started by saying, building a secure web browser in Electron, which is a sort of a version of Chrome, which allows you to customize it a bit more. It's not made by Google, but it's a version of that. And then they said, you don't try. This is a terrible idea, and it failed, and everything was pain, and we gave up. It was so bad. Before this moment, the whole Web3 name kind of made a bit of sense because they were actually attempting to build a web-like thing that was better suited for their community. And after this moment, when they killed Mist, the Web3 moniker became completely meaningless and confusing because the Web3 has nothing to do with Web2 anymore, actually, after this point. They're totally separate. They don't even have even the smallest amount of shared technology in them. And the reason, I won't go into what really caused them to fail, but the long and short of it is that because the web is a very inappropriate tool and the result of like 30 years of evolution, the whole show is kept on the road only through staggering quantities of spending by Google. Google sinks vast sums of money into Chrome, and that keeps the show on the road a little bit longer. Once these guys try to depart from that and even just customize it a little bit, they weren't even trying to build a complete replacement for the web. They just said, we'll take Chrome and we'll modify it a bit to make it more useful for us. The moment they tried, they immediately, like, the wheels started flying off because they couldn't keep up with the work that was needed just to keep it stable and secure. So they said, and these guys can print their own money. So if you can't print your own money, you definitely can't even attempt this. And that's why they gave up. Now, this has a very odd side effect, this whole dynamic, and it causes people to say things to me. Let's say over the past 12 years, I've had this conversation many times where people describe their system to me and they say, we're going to make a decentralized eBay. And I say, sounds good. How are you going to do that? And they explain, and I say, I don't think that's going to work. You're saying people will log into a website or whatever, and what happens if the web server gets hacked? Everyone will get their money stolen. And they say, yeah, well, we don't have any choice, you see, because nobody downloads apps these days. And at this point, I feel like about 50 years old. But also I say, really? This picture, this is a mansion in Beverly Hills, and it's owned by the guy who created Minecraft. And it cost him, like, I don't know, $100 million or something. It's the sort of mansion owned by, Hollywood actresses and things who get really big. In fact, I think he bought it from Beyonce. So, and then he held wild parties in it that are the stuff of Hollywood legends, supposedly, but I wouldn't know anything about that, being the kind of guy who definitely doesn't follow celebrity gossip. And I would say to people, but look at this mansion. This guy bought it because he made a downloadable desktop Java app. It's the most unfashionable kind of thing you can possibly write if you're a programmer. And he sold it for like 10 euros a pop. And now he's like a billionaire. So what do you mean nobody downloads apps these days? This is nonsense. This smells a little bit like ideology, actually. This is like people coming up with reasons why they don't want to do this tedious work because, well, maybe they want to do this for 5 years and then maybe they want to go work for Amazon and the Amazon guys won't care about this kind of thing. They'll just want to see you build web apps. So people would give me these weird excuses and I would say, yes, but are we designing handbags here, or are we engineers, right? There are good choices and bad choices when it comes to tools, and we shouldn't be so dictated to by fashion, right? Okay, so far I've talked about like blockchains and cryptocurrency and so on, because this is a CryptoMondays meetup, and that's sort of what this meetup is about. But now let's talk about everyone else in the software world. And some of these people don't think of themselves as needing decentralization, but I argue that their needs are actually quite similar. Consider, for example, industrial control. Look at this beautiful oil refinery here and these nice mountains in the background. If you implement this as like a cloud-based web app, right, and then Amazon has another outage of US East or whatever, something might explode in a giant ball of flame. So you can't do that if you're working in this kind of industry. Now, if, companies, tech firms, right? Like if you work at a place like Google, you can go your entire career and never think about the people who build software for industrial control, right? And the people who write programs for factories, because that's weird and niche and we don't think about that. And tech firms only want to think about consumer things that look sexy and that sell to 1 billion users. And if you're solving a problem that doesn't affect 1 billion people simultaneously, then they'll tell you, why are you wasting our time and money, right? We think big here, go home and leave. Right, that's the culture. So our tech stack, which is now almost totally oriented around web apps, is totally inappropriate for a lot of these sorts of cases. What about medical? Right, what you do not want in the middle of a surgery is, some company releases their fresh new look, right, to the doctors in the middle of your surgery, and then the doctor's like, "What? Where did the button go?" And now it's hidden behind like a new hamburger menu or something, and then the patient dies. That's not what you want. So in medical settings, right, you have software all over the place. This thing here is a computer, right? In fact, this is a CD drive. This is a DVD drive, actually, in the corner. And it's there because the way you want to update a device like that is by putting a physical disk in it, right? Because that way it doesn't depend on working internet connectivity. Right? Actually, hospitals have to be able to work even without mains electricity. They have on-site UPS and generator systems, exactly so if there's a power cut, they can continue surgeries. So they certainly can't depend on the cloud or anything, and you need control over when software updates are applied. but the browser has no notion of this at all because it doesn't even know about versions, because it thinks it's drawing a document, right? It makes sense. So all the people who do this kind of thing, again, they're not tackling problems that affect 1 billion people so they get forgotten about, but they're very important. I want to make sure they have good tools next time I go to the hospital. Right? What about military? Same thing. You cannot have soldiers in combat dying because Amazon had an outage or because, you know, their signal got disrupted by the enemy and now they can't reach the web server. So everything has to be local, right? It has to be totally decentralized. If you want like soldiers to communicate in the field, you have to be doing this in a peer-to-peer way. And the whole tech stack we have is not oriented around that kind of thing. So these guys they're out on their own and they have to roll their own, and all our tools are bad for these people. In particular, you don't want them to get hacked while they're in combat. And this goes back to the security problems I was talking about with the web, where everything that you do in web programming, if it looks obvious and simple, then it's definitely wrong and you will get hacked. It will appear to work, but you're still doing it wrong, which is a terrible state of affairs. And then finally, there's just bog standard business software. You know, it's not necessarily mission critical, but in the 90s, it's super common for like smart business analysts in big companies to start with something like Excel, and then they learn macros, and then they learned VBA, and they were able to grow the spreadsheet to, you know, quite complex sizes, and they're solving a real business problem. And then maybe they even go on and they learn a bit of Visual Basic 6. And you know, there was a very nice smooth ramp whereby they could just make things that were useful for the business, even if they weren't really like proper programmers. You could learn, and it was okay, right? You could learn and do this kind of thing. And nowadays, that sort of has faded away a bit, right? The web stack kind of replaced the Microsoft stack, and now if you're in a business and you want to, you know, someone's made a spreadsheet and you want to make a better version of it, you'll find a program and they'll say, oh, I'm a front-end guy. I need a back-end guy as well. Certainly, I can't do the whole thing myself. And then you've got two people and they won't agree on what they should do. And so then they'll say, we can't do this. We need a project manager and a product manager. And before you know it, you need like 5 people just to implement something that would have taken 1, right, at the end of the 90s. And so, and this is largely to do with the fact that because the web is sort of an inappropriate tool, there's enormous churn as people try out lots of frameworks and ideas to try and make it work better. And it's constantly changing and people's skills are constantly invalidated. And so you end up with specialism, maybe over specialism, because these apps don't have to be beautiful most of the time. They just have to work and be cheap. But we've kind of lost that a little bit in the software industry. All of these areas need aspects of decentralization, but they don't think of themselves as building decentralized apps, right? In particular, a lot of them need to be able to survive the loss of the original creators. Satoshi disappeared. No one knows why. But in the real world, it can happen for much more mundane reasons like bankruptcy, or the company that made it got bought and then the new owners don't care about that product, right? Or the market shrinks, but it still needs to continue, or whatever. They abandon it, right? Often they have very strict privacy or jurisdictional requirements. I dealt with this in the banking world with Corda all the time. So, you know, some I mentioned, but also here's the ironic thing. You know who is really hard to sell a cloud-based web app to? Tech firms, because they say, we're not going to upload our sensitive data to some random third-party company where we don't control what they do with it. That would be crazy. We expect other people to do that with our services, but we're definitely not going to do it with our own data. So, you know, this is one reason why they invent so much of their own tech, actually. And I saw that many times when I was there at Google. You definitely could not just sign up to Slack or whatever and start using it. You would get fired if you did that. So they would say, well, that's confidential information you're uploading. We didn't review them and stuff like that. Basically, anyway, you need stability and control, and where the user has to be powerful. Web technology and the way the software industry ships applications today is all about empowering the developer over the user. And sometimes that's what you want, right? There's a lot of cases where users don't really want control. It's just annoying and we're making them ask choices and so on. But often you do. And so this is when you need control for being, you know, you don't want to be opted into fresh new looks when it's not a good time for you. So that's my analysis of some of the problems that make decentralization difficult and who it affects. But what can we do about it? Well, step 1, I would say, is coalition building. It's not actually technical. There are many, many different groups of people who are neglected by big tech firms. And I say that as someone who worked there for a long time. I mentioned some, right? Like if you're some guy who's trying to write some software that controls some obscure device that's used in like 1 in 500 surgeries, then The people who make our platforms today don't care about you or your needs. But there's lots of them. And even though maybe this is not like a huge set of people each time, there's actually a lot of different groups who are neglected in this way. So find them, right? Find them, figure out what's not working for them, and then sell them products and new platforms so their revenues can materially support each other, and you can start building up a new set of platforms that's maybe better designed for what they need. Step 2 is making it easier to leave the browser. So this is where Hydraulic enters the stage. Our first product is not available yet. It will launch soon, but it's in private beta. So if you'd like to try it, just let me know. Email me or email contact@hydraulic.software. And this product solves the update and distribution aspects of what I was just talking about. It doesn't try and solve every problem with browsers, but if you want to distribute software outside the browser today, you're going to hit the problem of how to keep it up to date, actually. And how to get it and how to make all the different formats everyone's different computers needs. It's just tedious. There's nothing particularly amazing tech breakthrough like about it, but it makes distributing desktop applications as easy as web apps. It really is like you just press enter and it whirs and clicks and out pops self-updating packages for Windows, Mac, and Linux without an app store. And that's kind of critical because, you know, the tech world answer to some of these problems is make everything an iPhone app and sell it through the App Store and then hope that no one at Apple takes offense to what you're doing or misunderstands it or, you know. For example, if you submit an app to the App Store, the first thing they say is, well, we need to be able to log into your system to check that the UI looks sexy enough. And if you say, but this is a military system and you're not, you know, this is like classified and you're not allowed to access it, they say, well, then you can't be on the App Store. And if you can't be on the App Store, you can't be on any of Apple's devices, right, other than the Mac. So we are outside of that. We say, no app stores, no, direct, decentralized, right? No one in between you and your users. And it's really, it's a pleasure to use. It's a radical elimination of tedium and complexity that makes it way more practical to just step outside the browser. Step 3 for decentralization, again, this is a decentralized software update. If Bitcoin had had this, things might have worked out very differently indeed. Because what happened with Bitcoin was a sort of, in my view, of course, you know, I'm not a neutral party in this, but in my view, it was a sort of a lot of behind-the-scenes intrigue and backstabbing over who got to be the group of developers, because that was the group that everyone was following, right? And if you had had a more formalized system where you had a group of developers making new versions of Bitcoin, but then you had independent groups who said you can only release an update if it meets the original vision of the creator, right, who we all signed up to support, then they would never have been able to do that in the same way, right? Or it would have been much harder. And so stopping people from hijacking these things, especially for anything high security, is very important. And in fact, though I say this is something that, you know, maybe we'll add to Conveyor in future, actually the automobile industry is already experimenting with this because they also have computers and software update. And if someone hacks the software update server for your car and pushes a bad update whilst you're driving it, then you might die. So they don't want that to happen. In particular, they don't want that to happen to everyone simultaneously in some kind of future cyber warfare scenario, right? Which is like the nightmare scenario that we can all imagine. And so they are working on, they've done something a bit like this where different groups have to like, it's like turning the missile keys simultaneously. They all have to agree before an update gets pushed out, and they're all different people. And that allows, yeah, so this enables coalitions of mutually distrusting developers that they vote on new versions. And crucially, it's not just like it's not like a vote where everyone just raises their hands and someone counts, right? It's not an informal thing. It's actually enforced by the software itself. It won't even download the update if it hasn't been signed by multiple developers. I'd like to add this to Conveyor at some point. It's probably not the top priority because, as I mentioned, actually Hydraulic is not really a blockchain or a decentralized software company. It's more about general developer tools, and not everyone cares about this, but it would be nice to add in future, especially for high security scenarios. Finally, you know, even if we make stuff that's more decentralized on the client side, I've been talking about the stuff you download in this talk, but then we have the cloud, right? Everything is running in like Amazon and Google and Microsoft data centers. How can you do that? Well, there's a lot of interesting possibilities here. If you don't run in a web browser anymore, you don't necessarily need a web server at all. For example, you can start to reduce your dependence on the complex features that these companies provide. For example, your app could just connect directly to a database server. Don't actually need a middle tier at all. This is something I want to do more talks on in future, but this is the kind of thing you can start to think about when you're no longer tied down by the browser. You can totally revisit everything from the ground up and simplify a lot. In the same way that I said Photoshop is kind of decentralized because you can get your data out and put it into something else. That requires file formats. You'd be amazed at how many developers I've interviewed over the years who have never designed a file format ever. So there's a bit of, showing people how to do that and giving templates and so on. And then finally, there's this keyhole thing in the corner. So one of the products I worked on at R3 uses a feature called secure enclaves. And this is very interesting because it allows people to make binding agreements over the internet with computers. So a computer can prove to another one, like yours, that it's encrypted its memory, so the owner of the hardware can't read it, and they can prove that if you give it data, that it will treat it in a certain way and it will process it only in a certain way. And no one else can access it. So you can actually have like a whole group of people who are uploading data into a shared pool, and no one can actually access that shared pool. And then some calculation is done and out pops the answer. And this is really interesting because it allows you to remove a lot of the power that like the cloud vendors have without actually getting rid of them, which is good because they're kind of convenient, and convenience is good too, right? And we can do a lot to actually reduce the power of cloud vendors, but this is not really a talk about that. And then finally, as we incrementally evolve our way towards some kind of post-web vision, right, we can start to think about, well, maybe the Mist failed, the Ethereum guys failed and they gave up, but maybe we can try again and do better this time. And if we do, well, really, we should be able to do a decent job because the web is now 30 years old and we have 30 years of hindsight about what works and what doesn't and what people like and what they don't. So we can start to imagine new kinds of browser, right, which provide the same convenience for end users as a browser, but which are better suited for different scenarios that are maybe useful for people in factories and in surgical theaters and people doing high security Bitcoin exchanges and things like that. And it doesn't necessarily mean there has to be one. The model we use today is, there's like 2 or 3 browsers and it's one size fits all. And there's no real difference between those browsers, and there's surface level differences, but they're otherwise the same. So it's one size fits all, and that's the root cause of a lot of our problems. So, in summary, we reach the end of the talk. The summary is, I argue the software industry is bad at making decentralized apps. We make apps that are totally oriented around big companies who own everything and know everything all the time. And it's not due to some ambient evil, as is sometimes alleged by more excitable journalists and things. It's actually more because our tools, and in particular the way the web has evolved, they push us in that direction all the time. The tools make it easy to do centralized stuff where we control everything, and they make it hard to do stuff where we don't. And so we often take the path of least resistance, and that's how we've ended up in this situation. As a result, developers like us, we like coming up with weird excuses for why we misuse our tools. And often we blame the user, we blame the victim almost, and we say, no, users would never do something like download an app where they get to keep their own data. That would be crazy. No one does that anymore, except the people who do. And as a consequence, apps that are being advertised as decentralized in the blockchain community often on inspection turn out not really to be, or they are technically decentralized, but not in like a meaningful way for the end users. But it's not just those areas, not just crypto and blockchain, it's many types of software poorly served by big browser. So we could build a coalition of all those different groups and start to go back and improve the basics until they have something better. We can start with distribution and then work our way up from there. And that is what I mean when I say going back to the drawing board on decentralization. That is the talk. I hope that was interesting and has given you something to think about, even for the non-developers in the crowd. And that's done. Thank you very much. All right, it was 50 minutes, so we have 10 minutes or so.
A lot, Mike, and like you mentioned, we can open up for a round of questions from the audience. Before we do that, I want to start with a little question from my side, because when I first saw the presentation and we talked about it, you left me with a lot of questions. For example, you mentioned about leaving the browser and app stores, and I think it's something that we all got very used to having nowadays, something we can't even imagine living without. And so my question is, if we want to make decentralized apps mainstream, how would you envision a replacement of that, and while still maintaining a practical and easy way to use for non-technical users? considering that we can't share CDs and put them in our computers.
Yes, right. No, so I don't mean right. So what I'm arguing for here is not let's make computers inconvenient. Right. That it could come across that way because I've been talking about like downloading apps and keeping up. No. It's very convenient to just be able to type in the name of some company and their thing appears, right? And it's like 2 seconds and it's done, and you don't have to worry about it like putting malware on your system and so on. So there's a lot of good reasons and a lot of good services that browsers provide. And the problem is it's a sort of evolved technology, right? It's like the product of evolution, not really of like someone thinking a long way in advance. Stuff has been glued onto the side continuously for 30 years. So, you could do even just basic things like a web browser doesn't understand the concept that you can reach the same app in multiple ways. Right, the name of the app is the name of the company, is the name of the server. So if you want an app where you can say, well, if one company goes away or one node goes away, it can just use another. You can't really express that, right? Which is one reason why these apps always end up being like kind of fake decentralization, because if anything went wrong with that one organization you're connecting to, then the whole thing disappears. But there's no fundamental reason why it has to be that way. It's just that browser makers don't care about decentralized apps. They want to sell you cloud services and advertising, and they want you to log into their services. So as far as they're concerned, the number one problem with the browser is it doesn't support like augmented reality or something, right? So they're not going to add things like this, really. And there's lots of things like that, lots of examples. Hey.
Where do browsers like Brave fit in this scale that we've been talking about?
Yeah, Brave is awesomely named because it is Brave. Like, as you saw, like the Ethereum guys said, this was painful, don't do this. And the Brave guys are doing it. So that's great. Brave is like a lot of alternative browser projects in that they're really focused on end user features. So they don't really question like web technology as a technology. They say we can integrate micropayments and things. At least I believe that's true. I should look into Brave more. But I don't think they are saying like, here's a new way of doing apps that doesn't involve HTML, for example. It's more about let's add cryptocurrency and things to the browser, I believe. But my knowledge of it is out of date, so I might be wrong about that. But still, it's good that they're trying. Yeah. That's what we need. Are there any? Yeah.
Am I decentralized if I deploy my application on, let's say, R-Wave?
R-Wave? You'll have to...
Or IPFS, decentralized...
right. Well, I guess that depends on how you do it. So you might be. Yeah, the question is, like, from the user's perspective...
That's the solution, no? Deploy the application on a decentralized platform.
Well, then the question is, how does the user access it? Like, from the user's perspective, what are they actually doing to access your application? Decentralization is not so much about specific technologies, right? It's more about
keeping it up, right?
Partly, yeah. It's partly about things that if you disappear, does the app keep running? It's about if you want control over your data, do you have that, for example? If there's some disagreement in the group of people who make it, is there a way to resolve that? If you look at the decentralized system like the internet, which is a very successful version of that, they have answers to all these problems, right? There isn't really one computer that will like switch off the internet. And there's a foundation, there's the IETF and things where they flash out the details of what happens next, and it kind of works. But a lot of decentralized apps, if you say, well, I just put my stuff on IPFS, so I'm done, maybe, depends on a lot of other things. Okay, are there any other questions? No. Yes.
I'll drag you back to Bitcoin for a moment.
Okay, sure.
Just on the question of one of the key elements, I suppose, of a decentralized application is the ability to keep local data, your own local state. And you pointed out how Satoshi put out the Windows Bitcoin app very early on, which keeps all of the Bitcoin state, not just your own kind of local state. But you're one of the only people that ever actually did any real work with SPV, which was the model of just keeping the part of the Bitcoin state that is actually relevant to you. How important do you think that sort of segregated state model is, I think, in these decentralized apps?
Yeah.
Where there is probably a global data set, but people...
Yeah, I think it's really important. Actually, one of the reasons that
Sorry, Mike, could you maybe...
I'll repeat the question. Yeah. So Steve's question was about local data and local status, put it on your computer, right? And he said that Bitcoin, when you started the Bitcoin node, the first thing to do is download data to your computer. And if you generate keys, those are on your computer, they don't go anywhere else. And is this, to what extent is this a sort of characteristic of decentralized apps and things? Yeah, I think that's a great question, because actually one of the reasons that customers came to use Corda is that it went very heavily on not sharing everyone's data with everyone else, right? Even if you encrypt it or you replace names with pseudonyms, that model doesn't really fit what people imagine when they think of a decentralized system, right? They would say, why should I upload all of my customer data, even in encrypted form, to everyone else? This makes no sense. And Corda could actually avoid that, in some cases at least. So I think it's very, very important, actually. And this notion of, what's mine is mine is, to me at least, it's a key part of deciding is something really decentralized or not. Because this is all about a means to an end. No one really cares about decentralization per se. It's all about the benefits that offers and how much you have to rely on other people, mostly. Sorry, yes, you put your hand up first.
One last question, then we have to finish.
But I'll be getting another beer afterwards, for sure. I'll still be here.
Talk to Mike afterwards as well.
Yes.
Yeah, you had a...
What is your stance on progressive decentralization? So it's pretty much chains starting centralized and then promising that over time they're going to decentralize. Have you seen any such examples of progressive decentralization?
Yeah. Well, yes. I've seen examples of people who wanted that. Yeah. So that was something that came up a lot with Corda, where a lot of projects started out by saying we'll be totally decentralized, and then it's hard. Right? It's really hard. I'm not going to claim that, the reason people go for the one group controls everything is because it simplifies a lot of stuff. And so they would hit difficulties, or they would want to be able to sell to people who, for example, don't have IT departments. And because there's problems that I was talking about, right? They were not making apps you could just download yourself, like a consumer piece of software. It was all very much, oh yes, it's decentralized if you have an IT department to run a node. And so then they said, well, we want to sell to companies that are too small for that. So we'll run the nodes for people. And then they would want this sort of progressive decentralization, as you put it, where you start centralized and then people who want it peel bits off. The challenge with that was that to create a decentralized system, you need all the nodes to be cross-checking each other all the time, because no one is in charge, right? So you have to check lots of things, and this is very computationally expensive. It's a lot of work. And then the problem with the progressive model is you're paying all of the costs usually to do all that cross-checking, even though actually all the nodes are run by one company, or nearly all the nodes are run by one company. So I think there's a huge amount of interesting work to be done on designs that solve that. And then actually that's kind of part of the direction that R3 is going. I'm no longer there, so I can't really talk for them. But if you look at Corda 5, that's kind of one of the things they're trying to do, reduce the cost of that progressive model. All right, I think, yes, 57 minutes and 20 seconds, so I think we're out of time.
Sorry to interrupt the party. But like I said, you will have plenty of time to walk up to Mike and talk here after the presentation. Yeah. And I just want to mention that we're also gonna, first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. I think it was really insightful.
Well, and thank you for organizing, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone for coming. Our next CryptoMondays event is going to be on the 18th of July, so please already block your calendars. We hope to see all of you there next time as well. And if you have any suggestions on things we can improve, or if you want to support us or somehow help us out, feel free to reach out, any of us in the team. And we're more than happy to listen to your suggestions. And having said that, there's drinks, there's some snacks still. I'm sure most of you are just as hot as I am.
Yeah,
so I
think it's time to go get some drinks.
And have some good time together.
Thank you very much once again for listening.